This episode of the CyberWire is made possible in part by ExtraHop. It's becoming clear that today's attacks can't be prevented, but they can be stopped. Modern cyber attackers have already made it inside your network, but you have the upper hand. Find and eradicate threats with ExtraHop network detection and response and shut them out before real damage is done. Learn the advanced techniques attackers are using and how ExtraHop stops them with a live attack simulation. Visit extrahop.com/cyberwire. That's extrahop.com/cyberwire. A Shuckworm update. Pegasus spywares found on UK government officials' phones. Gangs succeed when criminals run them like a business. Julian Assange moves closer to extradition to the US. Tim Eades from the Cyber Mentor Fund on cyber valuations. Our guest is Wes Mullins from Deepwatch discussing adversary simulations. And a guilty plea in a high-profile cyberstalking case. From the CyberWire studios at Data Tribe, I'm Dave Bittner with your CyberWire summary for Wednesday, April 20th, 2022. As Russia's firepower-intensive tactics continue the reduction of cities in the Donbass and along the Sea of Azov, a familiar FSB threat actor returns to prominence in Russia's hybrid war against Ukraine. Symantec this morning updated their research on the Russian threat actor Shuckworm, also known as Armageddon and Gamaredon, and its activities against Ukraine. Shuckworm first appeared in 2014 during Russia's earlier aggression against Ukraine that resulted in its annexation of Crimea, and the group is generally held to be an FSB operation staged from that conquered province. Its principal focus has, since its inception, been Ukraine. Symantec is tracking 4 variants of the Terrado backdoor Shuckworm installs in its victim systems. Installation of multiple versions of essentially functionally equivalent malware is one of the group's characteristic bits of tradecraft. The practice seems to be a crude method of establishing and maintaining persistence. If the defenders find and kick one version, well, there are 3 others they might overlook. Symantec writes, while Shuckworm is not the most tactically sophisticated espionage group, it compensates for this in its focus and persistence in relentlessly targeting Ukrainian organizations. It appears that Terrado is being continuously redeveloped by the attackers in a bid to stay ahead of detection. Symantec adds, while Shuckworm appears to be largely focused on intelligence gathering, its attacks could also potentially be a precursor to more serious intrusions if the access it acquires to Ukrainian organizations is turned over to other Russian-sponsored actors. That's not surprising. Developing intelligence is always an early stage in battle space preparation. According to Bloomberg, Ukraine continues to augment its cyber defenses with significant help from domestic and international corporations. The University of Toronto's Citizen Lab reports that it's found multiple infestations of NSO Group's Pegasus intercept tool in British government devices, specifically in phones used by the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office and the Prime Minister's Office. Citizen Lab blogged, the suspected infections relating to the FCO were associated with Pegasus operators that we link to the UAE, India, Cyprus, and Jordan. The suspected infection at the UK Prime Minister's Office was associated with a Pegasus operator we link to the UAE. Much of the concern about Pegasus in particular, and NSO Group products and services in general, has been their ready abuse by governments who use them against private citizens. The British case is clearly different. The UK government had been prospected by foreign actors presumably engaged in intelligence collection. As far as private citizens are concerned, the European Union has decided not to organize an investigation of such cases, EU reporter says. This is really something for the national authorities. a spokesperson for the European Commission said yesterday. CISA has released 6 industrial control system advisories. They've also added to the Known Exploited Vulnerabilities Catalog. All federal civilian agencies must patch by May 10th. VMware describes a fundamental restructuring of cybercrime cartels thanks to a booming dark web economy of scale. Gangs operate like multinational corporations, and they now engage in more destructive behaviors than before. In particular, the criminal-to-criminal market is thriving with more commodity tools available, and that's enabled the gangs to scale their attacks quickly and easily. The gangs are also becoming more destructive. The reasons for this are complex. Sometimes victims' files are destroyed in an apparent attempt to dispose of evidence. Sometimes destruction serves as revenge for victims' failure to comply with the criminal's demands and as an incentive for future victims to be more cooperative. WikiLeaks impresario Julian Assange is now closer to extradition to the U.S., CNN reports, where he faces espionage charges, after receiving assurances from U.S. authorities that Mr. Assange would be decently treated while he's tried in the U.S. and afterwards, should he be convicted. The High Court overturned an earlier magistrate's court decision blocking the extradition. His extradition now goes to Home Secretary Patel for approval, but Mr. Assange still has an appeal left in his quiver. And finally, Reuters reports that James Bao, eBay's former senior director of safety and security, has taken a guilty plea in a very strange federal case of cyberstalking. While he was at eBay, Mr. Bao has admitted he organized a campaign of harassment against e-commerce Bytes, a mom-and-pop newsletter run from Natick, Massachusetts, that Mr. Bao perceived as critical of his then-employer. The newsletter's content always struck us as fairly neutral and anodyne, only moderately and politely critical, and not at all a threat to the online auction behemoth eBay. Apparently, the motivation came from some "will no one rid me of this troublesome priest" complaints expressed by 2 executives, including then-Chief Executive Officer Devin Wenig, who's also left the company. According to Reuters, prosecutors said the Steiners in August 2019 began receiving anonymous, harassing private messages on Twitter and disturbing deliveries to their home that also included fly larvae, spiders, and a funeral wreath. 5 other eBay staffers have also taken guilty pleas to other charges arising from the incident. Mr. Wenig has not been charged. He says he had no idea of what his subordinates were up to in and around Natick, in both physical and cyberspace. Before we wrap up, thanks for reading and listening, especially this week. It's our 6th anniversary as an independent company. For the past 6 years, the CyberWire has delivered your daily dose of the top cybersecurity news, and we're pleased to have become a trusted source for the industry. To celebrate our Big 6, and as a special thanks to all of our CyberWire listeners and readers, for 1 week we're offering a discount of 60% in annual subscriptions of CyberWire Pro. Use code CyberWireAnniversary2022 by April 25th to take advantage of this celebratory discount. Subscribe and save now, but above all, thank you for listening to the CyberWire. And now, a word from our sponsors, KnowBe4. So, what's a con game? It's a fraud that works by getting the victim to misplace their confidence in the con artist. In the world of security, we call confidence tricks social engineering. And as our sponsors at KnowBe4 can tell you, human error is how most organizations get compromised. Where there's human contact, there can be con games. It's important to build the kind of security culture in which your employees are enabled to make smart security decisions. To do that, they need new school security awareness training. See how your security culture stacks up against KnowBe4's free phishing test. Get it at knowbe4.com/phishing test. That's knowbe4.com/phishing test. And we thank KnowBe4 for sponsoring our show. These days, many organizations approach security with an assumed breach mindset. considering when rather than if an attack will happen. I recently checked in with Wes Mullins, CTO at MDR security company Deepwatch, on the utility of adversary simulations and red teaming.
The best way today is, set up a lab. There's a lot of open source tools and platforms out there that will allow you to, quote unquote, break things in your home lab on the internet without worrying about, doing anything nefarious or coming off as malicious in nature on the internet. You gotta practice though, the skills and techniques that are used in offensive security and breach simulation, whether it's red team, purple team, blue team. They are very practical in nature. There's no book that you're going to take or an exam that you're going to study for that's going to really give you that. It's practice, and practice makes perfect.
Can you sort of walk us through how an internal team would go about this? What a typical process would look like?
Yeah, I would say it's standing up a lab and then having the lab kind of devised in multiple subsets of, web app, which is where a lot of people typically get their feet wet, breaking into web apps, doing, basics with session state handling, user supplied input validation, and then going more into what I would call the in-depth exploit development, reverse engineering, and kind of having different pillars and, saying, hey, you go solve this challenge. And once you solve this challenge, then you get another challenge. And that will vary across whether it's web app or reverse engineering, exploit development, and then everything that is, red teaming, traditional pen testing in the middle, including brute force and social engineering and all of the alike.
Is there a cultural element to this as well? I mean, I suspect it's important to make sure that your various teams don't inadvertently end up adversarial with each other?
There is, but that's also part of the fun, I would say, is and done right, there are a lot of opportunities to build the rapport and build the relationships with those teams. And, it does very much become a purple team exercise where you have the ones emulating the adversaries and doing the offensive campaigns, also challenging the ones responsible for identifying and mitigating those attacks. Successfully done, like it is a great thing to do inside of an organization that just pushes everyone's boundaries every single day and allows them to grow and mature.
And how do you make sure that the things that are found are actionable, that there's follow through, that the things that the vulnerabilities are being fixed? I guess what I'm getting at is it would be frustrating for your red team to come up with all these things and nothing to be done afterwards, right?
Yeah, it's a great call out there. I think the key thing is when you do these exercises, what has been identified, make sure it goes through a very traditional process on identifying criticality, impact, and severity. And then throwing in the queue along with everything else, whether that's regular bug fixes or feature enhancements or anything, making sure that there is a path to remediation. One of the key aspects in that, though, is validating that it is, in fact, a issue. Something that we commonly see or, spray and pray from a slew of, pen test and red team providers that are out there. And a lot of it's very theoretical. If you can't prove it, you can't provide a screenshot, you can't reproduce the scenario in a live situation, that's going to make it really hard for the team on the back end that's then being tasked to go remediate it. So make sure that your findings are legit, make sure they can be repeated and validated at scale.
Do you have any words of wisdom for organizations that are looking to spin up something like this? I mean, are there any areas where people usually fall short?
I would say the labs. A lot of people they hire the red teamers, the purple teamers, the offensive capabilities, the adversary emulators, and they don't give them the same lab that, would be your internet presence. So if you want someone to really be valuable at it and provide the value that we all know that, adversary emulation can provide, invest in giving them something to break. And, I'm not saying give them a blank check, but make sure that if you have something that's on the internet that's very critical to you, whether it's your e-commerce platform or something you're handling payroll or transactions, and there are a bunch of different components around identity and database and store and cloud, that individual or that team of individuals that's being responsible for doing that exercise should have, a lab or a testing environment or development environment that is 100% a clone of that. And that is where we will see people struggle is they don't necessarily give the group that has, the challenge of going and spotting these issues inside of what is in most cases a very complex, mature enterprise environment. And that's where you find gaps.
How do you measure success? How do you evaluate, the return on your investment here?
One could say, you're doing it faster than the bad guys and gals are doing it. I would say success is as the organization matures out offensive capabilities, are there findings? Are you finding something internally before it is found by a third party that you're paying, in most cases, thousands of dollars, or through a bug bounty program? So if there are findings and there are actual remediation, steps that need to happen from quarter to quarter, month over month after the exercises are done, I would consider it a success.
That's Wes Mullins from Deepwatch. And now a word from our sponsor, Invicti. Your organization is building and updating business-critical web applications faster than ever, and with so much pressure to move fast, you may find yourself making trade-offs between innovation and security. Now you can build fast without sacrificing security, thanks to Invicti. Invicti is the application security platform that helps your dev, sec, and ops teams work together to secure every website, web app, and API, even if you have thousands. With unparalleled accuracy and automation, Invicti scales like no other AppSec solution. And with more than 50 integrations, Invicti slides into your workflows more smoothly than any other platform. Now you can innovate as fast as you want without compromising on security. Discover why many of the world's largest organizations innovate securely with Invicti. Visit i.invicti.com/cyberwire. And we thank Invicti for sponsoring our show. And joining me once again is Tim Eades. He's the CEO at vArmor and co-founder of the Cyber Mentor Fund. Tim, it is always great to welcome you back to the show. I want to touch today on cyber valuations, obviously something that you work on a lot with the Cyber Mentor Fund. Can you give us some insights, some of the things that you're tracking when it comes to cyber valuations in today's environment?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. So last year, you saw this incredible growth of cybersecurity investing and crazy valuations. Companies were getting funded with $2 million annual recurring revenue at $1.7 billion. And you have to grow into those shoes, and they're really big shoes. And so what you find is people were investing in growth or growth opportunity and were just throwing money at it as there was so much money in the system. But there's a number of challenges with that. One is if you make one misstep in your execution, you're going to look at it as a down round. And a down round is one thing, but when you're dealing with billions of dollars is crushing. Another one turns out is that any of the employees that come after those crazy valuations will almost certainly make no money because they have to go into those shoes before they do another round of funding. So I actually think, those things are bad. And then the third one, a lot of these valuations, again, let's just pick on one where they did $2 million ARR, $1.7 billion. What happens is the founding team or the CEO and the founding team will be pushed by the investors to do what's called a secondary, to actually take some money off the table, to sell some of their shares in order to keep going. But the challenge with that is it separates the CEO and the founders from the rest of the employees. Because, they've taken money off the table. They've taken 2, 3, 5, 10 million, whatever the number is, off of the table, but nobody else did, right? Unless it was open to everybody. And so then you get an economic separation of interest between the CEO and the founders and the employees. So multiple things will go bad with that. So, yeah, I mean, it was growth. And then right towards the end of the year, early December to around about now, it's all become operational excellence. When are you going to get cash flow positive? When are you going to, your annual recurring revenue or in your EBITDA to employees? And been much more, the metrics that people are looking at now are much more operational excellence based. And from that, valuations are down. You saw the public markets, the valuations in the public markets have come down, pretty significantly this year. And you'll typically see the private market valuations come down like 6 or 8 weeks later. So you're starting to see that be affected now every single day.
Is this a cyclical type of thing? I mean, do we see this as to use your words, these crazy valuations, and does it swing back and forth?
Yeah, absolutely. It swings back and forth. This is the year where, or at least the first 9 months of it, will be everybody who's tightening their belt, looking at cost efficient, sales efficiency business models and things like that in order to do it. But the markets have two sides of their brain, right? Fear and greed. And sometimes they move between the two of them really quickly. So greed will come back and that's how that will go. And then we'll back down to maybe not quite so crazy valuation, but pretty similar for sure.
For the entrepreneur, I mean, is it possible to time this sort of thing? Is there a best stage of the pendulum to get into?
Yeah, well, I would stay away. I personally would stay away from the valuation dynamic as a reason of when to raise and how much to raise. What I would steer towards is getting the right VC, getting the right investor alongside you is way more important than getting the right valuation. And so steering towards the right partner that's going to be with you through it, because there's always going to be bad times. And getting the right venture person, getting the right board member with you. And I always say you should go to the individual, not the firm, because the individual is the one that's going to be in the boardroom. And then focusing on that rather than the valuation. Clearly, raising money when there's a war on, sometimes people would say that's a tougher time. But for cybersecurity companies, when it's a cyber war, at least in part, you want to be in the cyber defense business.
All right. Well, Tim Eades, thanks for joining us. Thanks to all of our sponsors for making the CyberWire possible, especially our supporting sponsor, PlexTrack. Boost your team's efficiency and cut reporting time in half. Visit plextrack.com, the CyberWire, to learn more. And that's the CyberWire. For links to all of today's stories, check out our daily briefing at thecyberwire.com. The CyberWire podcast is proudly produced in Maryland out of the startup studios of Data Tribe, where they're co-building the next generation of cybersecurity teams and technologies. Our amazing CyberWire team is Liz Irvin, Elliot Peltzman, Trey Hester, Brandon Karp, Eliana White, Peru Prakash, Justin Sabi, Tim Nodar, Joe Kerrigan, Carol Terrio, Ben Yellen, Nick Valecki, Gina Johnson, Bennett Moe, Chris Russell, John Petrick, Jennifer Iben, Rick Howard, Peter Kilpie, and I'm Dave Bittner. Thanks for listening. We'll see you back here tomorrow. For the past 6 years, the CyberWire has delivered your daily dose of the top cybersecurity news, and we're proud to be a trusted source in the industry. To celebrate our Big 6, and as a special thanks to all of our CyberWire listeners and readers, for this week only, we'll be offering a discount of 60% off annual subscriptions of CyberWire Pro. Use code CyberWire Anniversary 2022 by April 25th to take advantage of this celebratory discount. Subscribe and save now, but above all, thank you for listening to the CyberWire network of shows.